The middle of January always arrived like a verdict in Briar Hollow. By then the snow had been walked into gray ruts. The river had quieted under a lid of ice, and every window in town glowed the same pale yellow, as if the cold had taught light to be stingy. People stopped talking about spring. They stopped saying when and started saying if. I come back on January 14th to close my grandmother's house, to sign the last papers and turn keys over to a realtor who kept insisting, in a tone that suggested he was explaining weather to a child, that no one buys in winter. I didn't mind. Winter made the place unrecognizable, and I wanted it that way. The porch was buried to the railings. The lilacs were black sticks. The mailbox leaned, frozen mid-surrender. Inside, the air smelled like wool and old wood and something metallic, as though the house had been holding its breath. I found the calendar in the kitchen exactly where she always kept it, hanging beside the stove with a magnet shaped like a cardinal. The top page read January, the days printed in stern black squares. Most of the month was blank. Only the middle had writing in my grandmother's tight script, a thick circle around the 15th. Beneath it, 3 words, "Don't open it." I stood there with my gloves still on, snow melting off my cuffs, and tried to remember if she'd ever said anything like that out loud. My grandmother hadn't been a superstitious woman. She'd been practical to the point of cruelty. Measure twice, waste nothing, don't make promises you can't keep. The only thing she ever treated gently was the winter itself, as if it had ears. That night, the house made settling noises that didn't settle. At 2:07 a.m., I woke to a sound like a fingernail on glass. Slow, patient. I lay still, listening, while the cold pressed at the window panes. The scrape came again, lower this time, as if it were tracing the sill. I told myself it was a branch. I told myself it was ice shifting. I told myself anything that did not involve a hand. When I finally sat up, the bedroom was lit by an anemic moon, and the digital alarm clock on the nightstand was blank. The power was out. The house was silent in the particular way a house gets when it cannot hum. The scraping returned, not at the window, but somewhere else, downstairs, near the kitchen. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had all the time in the world. I went down with my phone flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam quivered across the framed photos on the hallway wall. My grandfather in uniform, my grandmother holding a pie, me at 10 years old with a gap in my teeth. The photos looked wrong in the harsh LED glare, like props that had forgotten their lines. The kitchen was colder than the rest of the house. My breath fogged the light. The calendar swayed slightly, though there was no draft. The cardinal magnet clicked once like a small tooth. On the floor beneath the calendar sat the cellar door. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived. That should have been my first warning. You don't not notice a cellar door in a kitchen you grew up in. It was as if the house had edited it out until the middle of January. The door was old pine, painted the same dull white as the baseboards. A metal ring was set into it, something to pull. And beside the ring, someone had scratched 3 shallow grooves into the wood, like tally marks. The scraping came again, directly under my feet. I backed away until my shoulders hit the counter. My phone lit up with a notification that made no sense. Calendar event, January 15 to 12 a.m. Open it. I hadn't put that there. I should have left. I should have put on my coat and driven until the snow turned to rain and the world remembered color. Instead, I did what everyone in Briar Hollow did in winter. I obeyed the house. My hand closed around the ring. The metal was so cold it burned. The scraping stopped. For a moment, there was only my own breathing and the faint, distant tick of ice contracting outside. Then something below the door inhaled. The sound was wrong, too wet for cold air, too close to be imagination. It came up through the seams in the wood, filling the kitchen with the smell I'd noticed earlier, pennies and damp earth. I pulled. The cellar door opened easily, like it had been waiting with good manners. My phone's flashlight fell down a set of narrow steps in a darkness so thick it looked solid. The beam reached a few feet and stopped, swallowed. I could see the first step, then the next, then only black. A voice drifted up, thin as smoke. Finally, it sounded like my grandmother. Not her voice as it had been when she died, raspy, medicated. Her voice as it had been when she stood over me at 12 with a bandaged knee and said, "You'll live," and meant it. Firm, familiar, certain. My throat tightened. "Gran," I said, and hated myself for how hopeful it sounded. From below, "You're late." The house around me creaked as if shifting its weight. The calendar page fluttered once and went still. My phone buzzed again, screen bright in my shaking hand. A new notification. No sender. Don't open it. Below the steps, something moved. Not up, not down, sideways. As if the cellar were larger than the footprint of the kitchen. As if it extended under the house, and under the frozen yard, and under the sleeping town. The voice repeated, closer now, still in her tone, but not in her rhythm. Like a recording played too slow. "You're late." I aimed the light down again and caught for half a second the curve of something pale at the edge of the beam. Skin or ice, I couldn't tell. It withdrew with a soft scrape, the sound returning in a quick, eager rhythm. My fingers went numb around the ring. I realized then what the circle on the calendar meant. Not an appointment, a deadline. Outside, somewhere in the dark, the river ice cracked like a gunshot. The house answered with a sigh that came from the walls themselves. And from below, in my grandmother's borrowed voice, something said with quiet satisfaction, "It's the middle of January. That's when we change." The first time January went missing, I blamed the storm. It was the kind of blizzard that made the world feel unfinished. White noise from the sky, wind worrying at the eaves, drifts piling up like the snow was trying to bury what it had done. In our valley, weather had a habit of swallowing roads and names alike. The post office closed. The school closed. People said stay in the way they might say don't bleed. I worked the front desk at the Braemar Motel, a low strip of rooms at the edge of town where the highway widened just long enough to pretend it wanted to be a street. In summer we got fishermen. In winter we got stranded. That evening, January 14th, a man arrived at the desk with snow in his lashes and a duffel bag cut from old canvas. "You got heat?" he asked. "We got heat," I said, "if the power holds." His smile was a thin seam. "It will." I booked him into room 9. He wrote his name in the ledger with careful, childish strokes. Martin Kell. The pen squeaked. I watched his hand as if it might reveal something. The way you watch a stranger's shoes to see if they leave mud. "You're the only one in," I told him. Storm scared everyone off. "That's good," he said, as if a full motel would have been a burden. He carried his duffel without effort. As he passed me, I caught a scent that didn't belong in the lobby. Cold paper, cellar soil, and something faintly metallic like pennies warmed between fingers. When the door to room 9 closed, the motel seemed to exhale. At 10, the lights flickered but steadied. At 11, the wind calmed into a steady scrape along the siding. Around midnight, I started the routine my boss insisted on. Check the boiler, check the locks, check the ledger. I did it to keep my hands busy, to keep my mind from wandering into the long hall where each door was a dark square of quiet. That was when I noticed the calendar behind the desk. It was one of those cheap tear-off calendars from the bank, a watercolor barn under a red sun. I had torn away the 13th, then the 14th that morning. I could still feel the paper resisting, the tear clean along the perforation. But now the page read, January 16th. I stared until my eyes started to ache, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves under pressure. I flipped back. There was no 15th, no ragged edge where a page had been yanked away too hard. There was 14, then 16, smooth and unbothered. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the bank had made a mistake. I told myself it was nothing. Outside, the storm kept filling the dark with itself. In the morning, the radio hummed with static before settling on the local station. The announcer's voice was too cheerful, like someone speaking loudly at a funeral. And that's your mid-January update, folks. Today is Tuesday, January 16th. I turned it off so hard the knob bit my fingers. My phone showed January 16th. The computer at the desk showed January 16th. The motel security camera stamped its grainy footage. January 16th, 6:22. I opened the ledger again and counted pages. Monday the 14th, Tuesday the 16th. No blank line, no ink smudge, no missing sheet. My stomach moved in a slow, sick roll, like a boat on calm water, as if it knew something my mind couldn't afford yet. At 9, I knocked on room 9 with a plastic housekeeping sign in my hand like a shield. No answer. I tried again. Mr. Kell? Still nothing. The doorknob turned under my hand without resistance. The room smelled of stale heat and something else. Old dampness like closets in abandoned houses. The bed was made tightly, hospital corners. The bathroom was dry. No towel on the rack. No duffel by the dresser. Only the TV was on, volume low. Snow hissed on the screen. For a moment, I thought it was the Weather Channel until the image shifted, showing a close-up of paper. A calendar page, cream-colored, with a date circled in thick black ink. January 15th. The circled number seemed too dark, too real, as if the ink had soaked through the screen. A voice came from the TV, not from any broadcast I'd heard before. It sounded like someone speaking with their mouth full of cotton. "Don't look away," it said. "You'll forget what you saw." I reached for the remote. My hand shook so hard the buttons rattled under my thumb. The screen snapped to black. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A faint tearing sound, like paper being pulled very slowly along a perforation. It seemed to come from the hallway. I backed out of room 9 and pulled the door shut. The tearing continued, steady, patient. It drifted under the other doors too, an invisible sound moving along the motel like a draft. At the desk, I ripped the calendar from the nail and flipped through the stack. January 1st through 14, then 16 through 31. No 15th. My throat tightened. The sound of tearing grew closer, though there was nothing to see. Each rip was small, controlled, as if someone was taking their time. I grabbed my coat and keys and left the office. The motel's hallway lights seemed dimmer than before. The carpet runner was speckled with salt and old footprints. I counted the doors as I went to keep myself anchored. 1, 2, 3. The tearing stopped outside room 7. Room 7 was empty. I knew it was empty because I'd cleaned it yesterday. No, the day before yesterday, because yesterday apparently didn't exist. The key card in my hand felt suddenly ridiculous. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I slid the card and pushed inside. The room looked normal at first. The same cheap lamp, the same framed print of a river that never moved. Then my eyes caught the desk. On it was a stack of motel stationery, each sheet neatly torn from a pad. Someone had written the date on every page, over and over, in different pens and different hands. January 15th. January 15th. January 15th. Some were in block letters. Some were in cramped cursive. One was written so hard the paper had broken, leaving grooves like scars. There were at least 100 sheets, and beneath them a larger page, torn from something heavier. Cardstock, maybe. It was a calendar page. January 15th. Circled. A note was taped to it with clear tape that had yellowed, like it had been stuck there for years. If you remember it, IT will try to live in you. I pulled the tape loose. Underneath, there was another note, smaller, written in the same careful, childish strokes as the ledger signature. Martin Kell, it said, as if the name itself mattered. Then, count the doors. I turned slowly. The motel hallway was visible through the window, a strip of dim light and pale snow beyond. But something was off. There should have been 9 rooms. There were 10 doors. Between room 7 and room 8, a new door had appeared where there had only been wall yesterday. No, the day before yesterday. It was painted the same cheap beige as the others, with a brass number screwed into it. My breath came out in a thin, steaming line. The door looked old and new at once. The carpet in front of it was pressed down, as if many feet had stood there waiting. The tearing sound started again, right behind the door. I didn't move. The knob turned. It turned slowly, as if whoever held it wanted me to understand what patience looked like. The door opened to finger's width. Cold rushed out. Not winter cold, but something deeper, like the inside of a freezer that had been running for decades. It carried that same scent I'd noticed on Kell, paper and soil and pennies. In the gap, I saw a sliver of darkness, and, floating within it, a pale rectangle, a page. A calendar page, drifting as if suspended in water. January 15th. The voice came again, not from the TV this time, but from the gap itself, muffled, eager. "Help me," it said. "Just for one day. I should have run. I should have slammed the door and braced it with furniture and prayed the storm took the whole building away. Instead, I heard myself answer, small and stupid. Where did everyone go?" A pause. Then, almost kindly, "They went where you put them." The gap widened. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of damp paper. Behind the floating date, something moved, slow as a hand sliding beneath a sheet. I stepped back, my heel catching the edge of the desk chair. Paper on the desk fluttered, though there was no breeze in the room, each sheet whispering its insistence. January 15th. January 15th. January 15th. My eyes flicked to the window. Snow drifted sideways, erasing the parking lot in gentle layers. Beyond it, the highway was a blank, a white corridor that led nowhere. The door marked 15 open wider. Inside, I saw not a motel room, but a narrow corridor lined with filing cabinets, shelves, and stacked cardboard boxes. Every surface was covered in dates, sticky notes, stamped forms, torn pages. 1,000 small attempts to pin something slippery to the world. And on a chair in the middle of it all sat Martin Kell, coat still on, duffel at his feet, his face pale in the dimness. He looked exhausted. He looked older than he had last night. His eyes met mine with a warning that was almost pleading. "Don't," he mouthed. But the voice behind him, behind the corridor, behind the dates, behind the idea of days, sighed like a page finally torn free. "Just one," it said. "Just let me be a day again." My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out with numb fingers. A notification, calendar updated. I tapped it. January 15th had appeared between 14 and 16, bright and bold, like it had always been there. The screen shimmered as if pleased with itself. The corridor beyond the door seemed to brighten, as if fed by my attention. Kel shook his head, slow, desperate. He lifted one hand and pointed, not at the corridor, but at the hallway outside. "Count the doors," he had written. I turned my head, keeping my eyes away from the floating date as much as I could. In the hallway window reflection, I saw the motel doors behind me. 1, 2, 3. I stopped. They weren't in a straight line anymore. The hallway had stretched, subtly, impossibly, as if it had decided it could hold more than it used to. Doors repeated. Numbers skipped and doubled. A 12 sat beside a 4. A 9 appeared twice. At the far end, barely visible, another beige door waited with a brass number. Then another. Then another. The tearing sound rose into a soft, constant applause. I backed away from the open door, clutching my phone so tightly it creaked. The voice in the gap hardened, losing its softness. "You remember me now," it said. "That's the same as opening." Kel's mouth moved silently again. This time I understood without sound. "Forget." I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to imagine a blank wall where the door was. I tried to think of anything else. The smell of coffee, the sound of summer insects, the weight of my name. But my mind kept sliding back to that circled number, that insistence, that missing square in the month. The air around me felt paper thin. Behind my eyelids, I saw the date in stark black ink. January 15th. I felt, very gently, as if someone had put their fingers on the edge of a page inside my head, searching for the perforation. And then, from somewhere far down the newly endless hallway, a door clicked open, and another voice, my own voice but older, tired, and filled with static, whispered like a warning left too late. "Don't look away. You'll forget what you saw." In January, midnight has teeth. The town of Birch Hollow lay under a crust of old snow, the kind that had been plowed into gray ridges and forgotten. Streetlights turned it into bruised ice. Even the wind seemed tired, dragging itself through bare branches with a sound like someone breathing through cloth. I didn't mean to be out that late. The library shift ran long. Inventory, boxes of donated books, the furnace coughing itself awake and then dying again. When I finally locked up, The sky was the color of dishwater, and the moon sat behind thin clouds like an eye rolled back in its socket. My car didn't start. The engine tried once, then gave up. The battery light glowed weakly, as if embarrassed. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, watching my breath fog the windshield. I could call roadside assistance, but my phone was at 3%, and the cold ate batteries like candy. Across the street, the old Whitaker house watched me. Everyone in Birch Hollow had a Whitaker story. How the family vanished one January. How the father nailed the doors shut from the inside. How the police found the kitchen table set for dinner. Food petrified into dark shapes on plates. Chairs tipped back as if the guests had stood up too quickly. They said the house had been empty for decades, but there were always lights in it when the night was deep enough. I rubbed my hands together and looked away. Then, very clearly, I heard a knock. Not on my window, not on the library door behind me. It came from within the car, a small, polite tapping that seemed to travel through the steering column into my knuckles. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The radio, which I hadn't turned on, whispered with static. The tapping moved to the back seat. Tap, tap. I turned my head inch by inch. The back seat was empty. The pale dome light revealed nothing but an old scarf and a paper bag from lunch. Tap. The sound came from the trunk now, hollow and patient. I forced out a laugh that didn't have any humor in it. Enough, I told the car, as if it could be reasoned with. On the windshield, on the outside, a handprint appeared. It bloomed slowly, 5 long fingers smeared in frost, as though someone had pressed a warm palm to the glass and left their heat behind. The print was larger than mine. The fingers were too straight, too evenly spaced like a diagram. A second handprint joined it. Then, underneath, as if written by a fingertip that could melt ice, a message formed in a thin, wet line. Let me in. My phone buzzed. 1%. Something knocked once hard against the driver's side door. The whole car shuddered. I didn't think. I just reached for the handle, planning to get out and run back into the library, lock myself in until morning. But the handle wouldn't move. I pulled again. Nothing. It was as if the door had fused to the frame. A quiet chuckle came from the radio static, not a voice exactly, more like the idea of laughter translated into noise. I looked up. Across the street, the Whitaker house had a light on in the upstairs window. A single bulb, warm and yellow, a dot of domestic comfort in a dead building. The curtain moved as if someone had shifted behind it, and then the porch light clicked on. The front door opened. A line of darkness inside the house yawned wide as a mouth. Snow drifted through the doorway as if the house was inhaling. I told myself it was a squatter, a raccoon, anything. But my eyes wouldn't leave that open door, because in the blackness behind it something pale was standing, tall, motionless, with shoulders too narrow and a head that seemed to tilt at an angle no neck should allow. It didn't come out. It just waited, framed by the doorway like a host expecting a guest to finally arrive. The car's heater blasted suddenly, scorching air onto my ankles. The windows fogged in seconds. My skin prickled with sweat in the cold. The smell hit next. Wet wool and old perfume, the kind my grandmother wore, powdery and floral beneath a sour edge of basement mold. The back seat sighed. A pressure sank into the upholstery behind me, as if someone had sat down carefully, trying not to startle me. My pulse hammered in my ears. I kept my eyes forward because I knew, with a deep childish certainty, that if I looked back I would see it, whatever it was, leaning close, smiling where no smile belonged. The tapping returned. Not from the car now. From inside my ribs. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed my fist to my sternum, like I could hold my heart in place. Outside, the handprints on the windshield multiplied, overlapping, crowding. The glass creaked softly under the attention. On the radio, amid the static, a woman's voice began to hum a lullaby. I recognized it, and the recognition turned my blood to ice. My mother used to hum it when I was sick. My mother had been dead for 12 years. The humming stopped. Silence poured into the car, thick and heavy. Then, from directly behind my right ear, a whisper. Cold night. I swallowed. My throat clicked. Another whisper, closer, breath that wasn't warm, wasn't cold, just damp. January takes what it can. The library lights flickered behind me, as if the building itself was trying to avert its gaze. The Whitaker house stood with its door open, patient as a grave. My phone died. The screen went black. In its reflection I saw, for half a second, a shape over my shoulder, pale forehead, dark hollows where eyes should be, lips too thin and too wide. I screamed and jerked forward, slamming my palm on the horn. The blast shattered the quiet, bounced off brick and snow and bare trees. The sound felt like a flare fired into a storm. The thing in the back seat hissed. The pressure lifted. The upholstery rose. The heater died. The windows cleared as if a breath had been sucked out. And the car, impossibly, started. The engine roared to life like it had been waiting for permission. I didn't question it. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning, fishtailing onto the street. In the rearview mirror, the Whitaker house's porch light flickered, then went out. The front door swung slowly shut. But in my back window, a handprint appeared, frosted and perfect, right in the center of the glass. And under it, traced with a nail or a fingertip that could write on cold. Thank you. I didn't stop driving until I saw the first hint of dawn, thin and gray, stretching over the trees like a bandage. When I finally dared to look at the passenger seat, I saw something I hadn't noticed in the dark. A thin layer of snow scattered across the fabric, as if someone had come in from outside and never brushed themselves off. Embedded in it was a single black button. Old-fashioned. Bone. Still warm.